Welcome everyone to our webinar. Congrats, you got funding, now what? My name is Jason Kennedy with Early Growth Financial Services, and I am your moderator for today. This webinar is presented by Early Growth Financial Services and Distillery. The format of the webinar, it's going to last approximately 60 minutes. We will have time at the end of the webinar to take Q&A with both of our panelists. I encourage you to use the questions window in the section of your GoToWebinar console. I will be reviewing questions throughout the webinar. Any that are relevant to the topic at hand, I'll interject throughout the webinar to get those questions answered. Otherwise, we will answer as many as possible at the Q&A section towards the end of the presentation. So without further ado, let's jump right in and start with our panelists. So welcoming first, Alaa Ismail, Consultant CFO for Early Growth Financial Services. Alaa, say hello.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alaa Ismail. I'm one of the consulting CFOs here at Early Growth Financial. Early Growth was essentially founded to provide accounting and finance services for early stage or developing companies or high growth companies. We provide a range of services. We provide CFO help, and that can range from strategic planning, forecasting, or any kind of operational finance consulting that may be needed at companies in the early stages. And that CFO assistance is essentially on demand, so you use it when you need it. We also provide accounting bookkeeping type services for companies, and that's essentially the blocking and tackling. We maintain your books. We do accounts payable, accounts receivable, close your financials on a GAAP basis every month, and we're there to be your back office help on a as needed basis. So we're as heavy as you want or as light as you need. We also provide tax services, and that ranges from state and tax consulting and federal, of course, including sales taxes and so on. And we do valuation work. One of the things we'll get into today is 409A, which is a requirement for valuation of stock options pricing, and we do that. So we're essentially your outsourced accounting and finance department. And we've been around for, I think, over 8 years. And we have offices in New York, Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles, and San Francisco.
Great, thank you, Alaa. And next up, our other panelist, Shonnard, VP of Product for Distillery. Say hello.
Morning, everyone. As some of you may know, we are in the middle of a rebranding from Wheeze Labs. I came onto the team here to take the methodology of an in-house startup team to a third-party development company. So that's both kind of the full product team and also development staff augmentation. So we've redesigned our product or our process to give startups and enterprises a product development program that puts an emphasis on achieving holistic business goals and achieving revenue faster for new product launch. So the name Distillery reflects this no-fluff approach to using the most essential pieces of an idea to create a solid business foundation for success.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining us. And so let's jump right into the introduction here. So congratulations on raising your seed round. It may seem like the hard part's over, but there is a lot to look forward to and get prepared for. So you've shown your traction. The team's put together. You've got MVP or something similar, and you've got, of course, a very important piece. You've got the support of your investors. So today we're going to talk about a few different items, both from the development side and from the finance and accounting side. We're going to start with planning and processes. Then we're going to move into reviewing the market and then taking stock of your current situation. We're going to talk a little bit about building a roadmap and prioritizing. and then moving on to scaling your team and resources, and then finally making sure you're staying aligned and staying on course. So first up, we're going to talk planning and processes. And EB, why don't you talk a little bit about the critical elements there?
Sure. So at this stage, my guess is that you have a roadmap that is probably long, and there are a lot of strong opinions about what should be done in what order. And I'll talk a little bit more about how to prioritize your roadmap later. But something that it's really important to stay diligent about, especially in this phase, is documenting and testing your assumptions. So as I say, you start to get really strong opinions about what should be done when and why, but trying to keep an objective view of what those things are going to accomplish and for who, and prioritizing kind of based on the business value is really important at this stage. The other thing I'll say is that everyone has some kind of Agile experience on their resume at this point, or at least most people. But that the different methodologies for development can mean different things to different people. So while it may seem that you've sort of assembled some parts of your team and this is a period of real growth, it's important to come back to your team and make sure that you've really decided on where you want to start with your development methodology and what that really means for everyone. So whether it's Scrum or Kanban or really strictly Lean, it really just matters that everyone is aligned on how you're going to run your processes together. So a lot of people will not do training at this stage. It's really early. Usually your team is small and training kind of seems like a larger company type of thing. But especially if you have a younger team and you're scaling quickly, I would make sure that you, if you're going in Agile direction, that the foundations for that are really, you have enough team members that truly know that process so that you reinforce it with everyone else and everyone new coming in.
Fantastic. And so from the financial side, let's talk a little bit about the books.
So I'm going to kind of take the 2 points in the prior slide, being lean and agile and having discipline, to kind of segue into this slide. Part of the ways that you could maintain your the lean and agile approach is to figure out from a financial side where you're at. And the best way to really do that is to maintain a proper set of books. So where prior to funding, it may not have been necessary to maintain current and accurate financials, it becomes more and more critical as your company is growing. There's a big difference between GAAP and cash basis accounting. A lot of companies in very early stage are essentially using cash basis, which the primary difference is in GAAP accounting, you recognize any revenue when it's earned. In cash basis accounting, you recognize the revenue when you receive it. In GAAP accounting, you recognize expenses when the expense is incurred. In cash basis accounting, you recognize the expense when you pay it. GAAP accounting is much better tool for running your business because it aligns revenue, if there's any, and expenses in the proper time frames. And it allows you also to do a much better forecasting process. As you know, in a lot of businesses, if you have revenue, the collection of the cash is never really the same as when the revenue is earned. And sometimes when you're in a lean cash position, the payment of the expenses is not aligned when the expenses are incurred. So GAAP basis accounting books are very, very critical now that you've gotten some funding. Forecasting really is the measure of how you're going to stay lean and agile. We'll get into bottom-up forecasting later, but if you don't have a roadmap, you don't know where to go. And I think a financial forecast is essential right now that you've gotten money. I've seen so many companies raise money and either burn through it very, very quickly or marshal their resources too much and not invest enough for growth. So having that forecast, giving you the financial roadmap on where you're going and align your operational goals with the related numbers is really critical. And then finally is what is the new funding, how long is that going to take you? What is your cash runway? And all of those things are very, very important right now. Not only are you going to need it for your operations, but your investors are probably going to need to know that information on an ongoing basis.
Right, so we started by looking in. Now let's look out a little bit and talk about the market in general. EB, you want to talk us through some of these points here?
Yeah, so this is a really good time to kind of regroup and again review the market because it does change. So a really important point here is this projected growth area on the bottom right. So what buyer personas and market segments do you project growth coming from? So I was working with a company a few weeks ago where they've been around for 10 years and they have some success. It's a very technical product and their growth had just kind of flatlined, and they couldn't really figure out why. So we started talking through kind of what they were doing and their methodology and how they were trying to address their user needs. And it became obvious that they truly did have a user focus, right? So they were listening to their users, they were understanding what they wanted and then building those things. What was happening was that those users were their early adopters. So the early adopter persona is truly different than the mainstream buyer persona. And so usually your early adopters will be more willing to do something more complicated. They are often more on the technical side, and the priority is for new features and to be able to do new things versus those things being simple. So what we walked through was the difference between kind of their current user and the user that they were going to have actual growth from. And so what they really needed to do was take a step back and instead of prioritizing adding on more and more features, taking all of those features and making them easy to use so that, somebody's grandfather or whatever it is would be able to use the product and you could start growing that segment. Another important piece that I'll say about the market is a lot of people can start to get really focused on competitors, and they'll want to make sure that they're matching their features, or a competitor comes out with something new and they want to make sure that they have everything that that competitor has and then more. But time and time again, I've seen and learned that the companies that are truly just looking at their users, that user that is going to provide growth and addressing their needs better than any competitor, is the team that's going to win. So while it is important to know the competitors that are out there and be able to kind of understand what they're doing, it is most important to be able to limit how reactionary you are to that and keep your kind of trust in yourself and focus on your own users and making sure you're solving their problems in the way that you know is best.
All right. Fantastic. And so taking stock of the current situation, we'll talk a little bit from both sides here, and EB will let you lead us off from the product side for current operations. Kind of what should you be looking for?
Sure. So this part is tough. So especially once you have some money, and most often you'll have a board, you'll need to be able to explain to them what you're doing with that money. And at this point, it can be just as important to delete features or to take things out or to modify them as it is to adding new ones. So, and it can be really hard to justify internally, again, because at this point you probably have a backlog that is huge and long and kind of from many different perspectives, each piece of it that can seem really important and kind of critical to get done quickly. But it's essential at this phase not only to prioritize adding new features, but to evaluate how the existing features are performing as well. So taking, again, that dedication to being objective about what your assumptions are. Is this feature really solving a user problem? Is it halfway solving a user problem? So there needs to be people can get very focused on just looking at your metrics and your analytics and kind of as you start to grow and not pulling in as many real users and sitting and watching them use it or using, usertesting.com and getting more data about kind of in real life how it's working as well. And both are essential. But what that other one uncovers is, they're using this feature and it kind of solves that problem, but it could be solving it better. And so things like that where you don't overwhelm the user by just adding more and more, and you make sure that you're refining just as much as you're adding, will really make the difference in this kind of critical period where you're doing more changes to be able to really hit the product market fit.
I had an interesting question that's just come in that kind of plays to this. Interesting way of wording it. How often do investors meddle at the product or feature level?
Oh, it really varies, right? So it really depends on who your investor is, how big they are, how involved they are, how much money they put in, kind of all of these things. But what I that it's really important, especially for the CEO or whoever is presenting to that board, to lay the groundwork early, right? To set the rules of what this board is going to govern versus what's going to be, governed internally. So I've had some experience in board meetings where we are talking about individual features, and it is not the most productive at all. So my best advice there is to, as I say, lay the groundwork early about what's going to be governed by the board and what's going to be governed internally, and then just keep circling back to those rules. And every time that, definitely listen to what the board wants to contribute, but do it in the way, kind of in a standard product management process where everything is input and the board's input is another piece of input, the market is another piece of input, the engineering team is another piece of input, and all of that has to be balanced and matched to your highest value business goals. And so when you can rationalize what you're doing that way, the argument for how you're prioritizing things can usually become a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's some interesting insight, especially for the for the investor or the board-facing members of the organization. Alaa, talking a little bit about the financial side of things. Can we jump into that?
Sure. And I think I just that word meddle is sticking to me, and sometimes that meddling could be the life and death of your company. And I think, Jason, a good topic for another webinar would be board CEO and board management, because that is very, very critical I'm sure from a product and from a financial point of view. But just to kind of take it from here, one of the biggest pivot points when you raise money is a decision that you as a company have to make. If you want to dig deep into your current install base and make them successful, or do you want to go out and expand your install base if you have customers? And that is a decision that a lot of management teams face. Do we go out and get 5, 6, 7, 10 more customers? Or do we work on 2 or 3 customers and really develop our product? And a lot of times that decision from a financial point of view, from an engineering or a product development, is not that different, meaning that that you need to do what you need to do to develop your product, and it becomes really a sales and marketing kind of decision at that point. So do you spend the extra money in the sales and marketing to expand your customer base, or do you continue to develop your product, work out the bugs with a smaller install base, knowing that the cash requirements for each is going to be different, and involving your board very early on in that decision process is critical. It could be that you have a very, very supportive team of boards and investors that could come back to you and say, and help you with that decision and say, look, it's more important that we're successful with our current install base. And if we get 9 or 10 customers as opposed to 100 customers, that is enough for us to sign on to the next financing round. And that is a completely different decision than a board that says, no, we just want as many customers as possible, forget about developing your product. And with that guidance, you're able then to forecast a little bit better. Because at the end of the day, you're only going to last as long as your cash allows you. So at this point, forecasting, aligning your product and your operational goals to your financial goals with a proper forecast becomes really, really critical. Another part is just kind of general corporate maintenance. Are you keeping current with all your tax filings? Are you going to have any surprises that are going to come to the board that you don't want to necessarily present? So this is the time to take stock and to have either a good forecast in place and to make sure that all your corporate governance is in place.
Yeah, and just to kind of pile on to that about kind of the board management piece, I completely agree with what Alaa was saying there. So involving, kind of being completely transparent in what's facing you and your strategy for going after it, right? So involving them in decisions and that kind of reasoning that you have in the strategy, but just keeping it at the right level of granularity. So yeah.
Yeah, that's all great stuff, and we see that pretty regularly, right? Especially on the early stage with the tax filings. Companies, just not quite aware of everything that they've got to take care of, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so that's on the taxes side, we can't preach that enough. So that was all fantastic insight. So looking forward a little bit, we'll talk about the roadmap and trying to figure out what to prioritize. So we'll start on the development side with EB.
So I've touched on this a little bit, but it's really important at this point to get really clear on what your goals are. So it's very easy in a product company, especially when you're small, where you have kind of product goals and that gets intermixed with just assuming that's the same as a business goal and not separating these two things. So one thing that I really recommend to companies is to have a strategy session stage with a kind of an external advisor. So just really break down the business and come out of, a 1-2 day process with an understanding of what you want to achieve on the business side. And then from there, prioritize your roadmap based on what features and what work needs to get done in order to achieve those business goals. So when I'm setting up a backlog and setting up kind of the epics, which are the main the big pieces that need to get done. I try to, with at least kind of 80% of the backlog, make sure that all of those are mapped specifically to a business goal for that period of time. You need to leave some wiggle room for like revamping a thing or kind of engineering, technical debt and things like that. But when you get really clear on the business goals you want to achieve and then aligning those things to product goals, it becomes much easier to manage everything and keep the team aligned. So an example here is like if your business is to one of your biggest differentiators is that you're the simplest and fastest in the market to do something. So as someone that does something that, say you need to be able to download something, right? Like, so you have an epic that's called the download experience. So from the UX side, you'll have stories to make that as simple as possible. And then from the engineering side, you'll have stories to make that, say, like increase download speed. So, teams can really struggle with how to organize their backlog and, where things go and at what level of granularity they should go. But when you set it up from, top down from the business goals, you can align it from there. So in some backlogs, you would see that engineering task of, optimize something, make something faster as a separate goal than the download experience epic. But when you map kind of the product goal, the engineering goal, the UX goal, everyone under one piece, then as a business owner, it becomes much easier to understand when you're achieving your business goals and how. So just to summarize there, my biggest rule of thumb for prioritizing what to build is to make sure that you are really clear on your business goals and then mapping your backlog to that.
Great, and from the financial side, we'll get into something very key for early stage companies, a la the bottom-up forecast.
Right. So, once you, like EB just mentioned, you're faced with a whole lot of operational product-related decisions that you are making. And once you've made those decisions, it's time to essentially put those operational goals and align those with your financial goals. And the way to do that is with a bottom-up forecast. Before I get into the bottom-up forecast, let me kind of, there's two types of forecasting that are typically done. One is a top-down and the other one is bottom-up. For a lot of companies that have just gone through a financing round, they probably did a top-down forecast, meaning that they've had an estimate of their market size and they said, okay, we're going to address, this is just an example, we're going to address a certain percentage of the market, or here is the segment that we're going after, and based on that we could win X percentage of that. And they might have, based on that kind of revenue growth, they might have done some kind of back of the napkin calculations of the number of employees they might need or the sales and marketing spend that they might need. But nothing very, very specific. It's hard in very early stage companies to get down to that level. That type of forecasting is not very useful when it comes to now that you've raised some money and managing a company. So what I advise a lot of companies who have just received funding to do is to do a really good detailed bottom-up forecast. That means that on the revenue side, for example, you don't just do kind of a general assumption. You look at your pipeline, for example, and you see the customers that you're trying to go after, put in some factors in there and say, what is the chances of us being successful? So you have an actual customer pipeline from the revenue side. This is also an opportunity to align all your product goals with the actual financial needs. Do you need to hire consultants? What's that going to cost you, and when are you going to hire them? And put that in your forecast. Do you have to hire employees? Make sure that you have an idea of what that employee is going to make and when you're going to hire those people, and get that into your forecast. Do you have do you have facilities needs? Get your facilities and your administrative in your forecast on a detailed basis. And a good financial consultant can help you with that process. And that roadmap is, it really goes along with your product development, and it becomes your scoreboard and also your roadmap, because if you're doing your financials on a monthly basis, a good forecast aligns with those financials, so you're able to see where you were and then adjust to the forecast to be in line of where you're going and what your operational goals are. So creating a bottom-up forecast at this stage, I think, is critical.
Awesome. So that is going to talk a little bit, or it's a great segue over into scaling your company and proper planning for growth. So EB, we'll start with you and talk a little bit about hiring versus outsourcing.
Yeah, so there's no, we could do a whole webinar on scaling, and there's no right answer for everyone on this. So what I will address here is the decision between hiring an in-house team using some kind of like developer staff augmentation, or hiring a third-party kind of full product team to run things. So. So some of the considerations here are how much money you've raised, how much original kind of experience that you have already in the tech industry and building teams, and kind of what your runway is as well. So the argument for, I think, hiring developers for staff augmentation is that you can get outsourced developers that are cheaper, but I would say some of the things that you need to look out for there is, are they managed, and how well will the communication run? So it's a common pitfall to get an outsourced team and kind of you check in with them once a week, and it's just not enough, right? So the results of what you get there are not as intended. So when you're looking for an outsourced team, I would make sure to find a team that is in some way has a project manager attached. So if you have a project manager or Scrum Master on your side that's really strong, that's going to run it, then I think that that may make sense for you. Or if the outsourced company provides that, then that makes sense. From the in-house team side, I would say that makes the most sense for kind of someone that has more experience in the tech industry. They may know people, they kind of know who they want to hire. The kind of risk there is that, hiring is a lengthy process. These people may not have worked together before. And again, kind of going back to some of the things I said about making sure that everyone is really clear on what your process is and what that means at every stage. So, so hiring an in-house team off the bat kind of can create some of those risks of getting up to speed and running together quickly can take a bit of time and management. And the third kind of consideration is using kind of mostly a third-party product team. I'd say the benefits for this are probably people that are newer to the tech industry, or people that want to, with sort of lower risk, get up and running really quickly and then build their team and kind of cycle off the third-party team. So there's lower risk on this side if you find the right third-party team, that they have worked together, they know how to run quickly out of the gate, and then if it's kind of the right people as well. They should be there to help support you as you hire your own in-house team as well when you want to scale more. So those are kind of the three options and some pros and cons for each.
Right, and as an outsourced accounting firm, I mean, we can certainly extol the virtues of working, with an outside firm for, non-core functions of the business, especially when you're, in high growth mode, right? When you've got to focus on pulling in users or revenue or scaling product or something along those lines, right?
That's absolutely true, and I think some of the points that were just mentioned about what are the benefits of having it in-house as opposed to outsourcing and that transitioning, and from a product side, I think that's super critical. I think the decision from back office needs is probably less. Obviously from where I work, I'm a strong proponent of outsourcing back office needs in the early stages of your company, just because you're going through a lot of growth. You're going to need a lot of different expertise, and that expertise is really hard to hire in the early stages of your company, but it makes a lot of sense to do that on an outsourced basis, specifically in the back office stuff. But I think to kind of segue, and not that I've kind of hammered this, a lot of these hiring and outsourcing decisions become a lot more clear if you're doing a really good bottom-up forecast. So I don't want to keep battling on this, but I think a forecast helps you make those decisions as well, by seeing what are the financial pluses and minuses related to those hiring as well. It could be an additional data point when you're making that decision. To kind of move on in the planning for growth, one of the things that a lot of companies pre-funding, they issue stock options to folks, and don't have a real process around it. You first of all have to have a formal stock option plan in place. And one of the requirements folks forget about is a 409A valuation. The IRS has came up with a tax code. The tax code is 409A, which essentially dictates that companies with stock option plans have an outside valuation to determine their option pricing. That has to be done at least on an annual basis. It could be more if there are significant events that would affect the valuation up or down within that 12 months. But the safe harbor for the 409A is at least an annual 409A valuation. At Early Growth, we help through that process. We also help manage that process, because it's not just hiring a 409A valuation company and just letting them come up with a valuation. A lot of our CFOs have had experience in this area, so are able to interact with the valuation companies and be able to align the actual valuation. So that's really, really important to have in place, especially if you've just raised a round of funding, because that is a critical variable that would require a new valuation. The other thing that you need to do now that you've raised money, and make sure going forward that you're due diligence ready, because hopefully you're going to get a next series of funding, or you're going to get acquired, or you're going to go public, and you want to be ready for due diligence. And to be ready, you need to make sure that your legal agreements are maintained and they're in good order, that the cap tables are current, and they're accurately being maintained and accurately are reflected on your financials. Any critical agreements that you have with customers are documented, and you have those. Each board meeting has minutes that are kept, and that you have those. And ensure that you have an HR process in place, because as you become bigger, HR issues are a lot more relevant, a lot more critical, and you have a lot more exposure. So having things like a handbook, HR policies, and having commission agreements with your salespeople in place will really not only is needed from a due diligence, but helps you with good corporate governance and helps you run the business.
All great stuff. So we've talked about the planning and processes. We've talked about reviewing the market, taking stock of the current situation. We've talked building a roadmap, prioritizing, and here we've talked about scaling. So I want to get both of your thoughts on staying the course, making sure you're staying aligned with the vision. Evie, if you kind of want to lead us off from the development side, how do you keep everybody on path to, where you're forecasted to go?
Yeah. So something that I think is interesting, especially now a lot of people have read the Lean Startup, and it's a really good kind of foundation for a lot of things, right, for running your process. But I think an unintended side effect of it is that is there's so much pivoting that and kind of being comfortable with pivoting that people sort of end up losing their vision a little bit, right? They sort of become in the business of having a startup versus that specific one, and at that point it really becomes the job of the leadership to keep reinforcing kind of why things are being done and keep explaining it from every perspective. So that's when you kind of get those intangible features that come from prioritizing a mission. So if you really know who you're doing this for, who your user is, and you're focused on that, those kinds of things come up much better. And then, as I say, it's really easy for the different teams to start to get a little misaligned, right? So sales must have these things or they'll never sell anything ever again, and marketing must have this thing, and if we built it this way, then we'd be able to address so much more of the market. And so the different teams can get a little misaligned, but just always coming back to those business goals and who you're doing this for and explaining it from every perspective can really go a long way for keeping the team aligned. Another thing that I didn't say earlier is to never skip your retrospectives. So if you probably most people are familiar with this, but retros are one of the ceremonies of the Agile process or the Scrum process, and basically the team comes together. They say, and it's a meeting about how to improve their process. So start doing, stop doing, keep doing, and the teams that really make time to have their retros together are the ones that evolve their process to make sure that it is really working for them. And it becomes so obvious, the teams that take time for their retros and the teams that don't. So it's one of those things that it's really easy to skip your retro or not spend a ton of time on it. But one of my I'm huge on them, huge on retros, and one of my best advice is to make that really important team time. Do it on a Friday, get some food, get some beer, and really take the time to talk out how you can improve your process in the coming sprints.
Great. And Olive, from the financial side, how do you keep everybody focused on upcoming milestones and try to keep them in line with the forecasts that the financial guys have put in place?
I think really the key thing is that will help. By the way, I really agree on this retrospective thing. I think the one thing that management teams don't do is they don't learn as effectively as they need to, and really that's really the role of the CEO or the leader of the organization, is to make sure that everybody's aligned. But from a finance point of view, is really A lot of companies seem to think that the financials or the financial forecast is something to be kept under lock and key for the CFO and the CEO to go over in private, and it's only done, only exposed in board meetings, for example. I think the more visibility you have across the organization from your financial goals and financial results, the better your team is in aligning their tasks with the overall goals of the companies, because it's not just the operating goals that are important, but also making sure that the financial aspects are there, so you could have the staying power to be successful. And like I said before, the financials are really the scoreboard of how the organization is doing in some ways, and sharing that with your team, with your management team, not just the results, but also the forecast, and having them be intimate and a critical part of that process is really, really important. So you could align, the company's operations with your vision.
Right, and you two guys are providing some interesting perspective, both from the financial side and from the development side. Do either of you have any pitfalls that like CEOs should be avoiding when it comes to working between finance and development? Because I'm sure it's always not a happy medium, right? Like, the finance wants to keeps control spending. Development sometimes needs a little extra to get this product out of the way. Like, is there anything, EB, I'll ask you first, is there any pitfalls to avoid or anything to touch on that CEOs should be thinking about, when it comes time to keeping aligned with vision?
Yeah, I think, and this is kind of a more general than just between product and finance, but just not being reactionary, right? So it's really easy to be in kind of these high pressure startup situation, and you see a competitor doing this, or someone, a new technology did this, or whatever it is, and kind of being able to get distracted from what you're doing easily. So that CEO being the person that is kind of the calm, the calm keeper of the vision, and listening to the argument from finance that we don't need to spend, and the argument from product or engineering that we do and why, and then balancing those things out, right? It's always at that point, just about getting as much information as you possibly can, and then making a decision based on that. So as much as possible, trying to keep to your vision and not become reactionary to kind of anything external.
Right. The only thing I would add, I think there's a reason why CEOs make a lot of money, because they have a lot of on their plate, and there's also a reason why a lot of finance people don't end up leading companies, is because they tend to be a little bit too overly conservative. So that balance between your vision and your operating goals and all the financial restraints is really the key to successful growth and successful companies. Somebody who's there to take the input from the operating people, the sales, marketing, and product development folks, as well as the finance, and make the proper decisions one way or the other, because at the end of the day, that is really what's going to be needed. Very few companies just have so much success right out of the gate that all the decisions become automatic. There's always these critical moments in your corporate development that somebody has to make a call. Do we spend this much on product development? Do we marshal our resources in sales and marketing? Do we, those kind of decisions are always going to be there. And really the important piece is to have really good and honest input and information, so decisions could be made in the most effective way. A good financial plan and a good financial consultant is a critical piece, but not any more critical than a good, product development team and a sales and marketing team, and being able to take those into consideration. I've seen companies marshal their resources and not really spend and miss market windows, and at the end of the day, it just takes them a lot longer to burn through cash. But I've also seen companies that get enamored with the raise and start really spending too much, and by the time that they run out of money, they really have not met their product development goals. So it's a really fine balancing act, and that really requires good information so that the leader can make good decisions.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the last piece of that is then explaining it back to everyone, right? So you have this process where you're gathering as much information from each perspective, and you need to make a call on that. And then the last piece is really explaining to everyone why that was the decision. So it can become easy to just need to make those decisions and make them, and to the team, if it isn't explained back, it can be hard to understand what kinds of decisions are made and why, right? So how this thing is being run and what the priorities are, and are you continually basing those priorities on the vision and the goals. So one of the things, is everyone does not have to agree with the decision, but really explaining it can go a very long way to keep your team aligned as well.
This is all great. Fantastic. So we've reached the end of the presentation here, so it's time for a little bit of Q&A. Just a reminder to our listeners, you can use the questions pane in your GoToWebinar panel to ask questions. We've got a few that are in already, so we'll start with those, but in the remaining time, if we can get to any additional questions, we'll do so. So we'll start from the top here. Alaa, this may be one that you can answer here. Will my board dictate my runway? So I guess the question is this more of a collaborative effort, or do your investors come down and say, no, this is what it's going to look like? What do you typically see?
What I typically see is that they don't dictate your runway, but they dictate your cash flow, your cash flow decisions. Essentially, your board is probably made up from your investors. So at some point, you're going to have a discussion with them about your goals going forward. Is the company going to get to a certain milestone and raise the next round of financing, or are they going to get to a certain milestone and get it ready for sale, or they're going to get to the next milestone and essentially take off organically? So very rarely does a board tell you you should spend your money on this or spend your money on that. So in that way, they don't really dictate your runway. However, your runway is managed by your corporate or investor expectations and support. So, a lot of times, just prior to this funding, you've probably had a decision about your goals. We're going to raise B round in 16 months or 15 months or whatever it is. Or we're going to get to a stage where the company is going to be attractive for acquisition, or those kind of discussions are probably ongoing and should be a regular part of your board meetings, and that is aligned with your runway. But very rarely do I see a board say, don't spend money on this, spend it on that. That's essentially why they're investing in you as a manager, as a CEO, and your management team to make those calls. They will question it if in your financial presentations your runway shrinks by 5-6 months. Those kind of questions will come in place, but it's usually a question on the result, not on the detail.
Gotcha. And we've got a similar question from the product development side, EB. I'll throw this one to you. But when speaking with my investors, how high level should my product roadmap be? So when you're speaking with investors, I guess what does that, do they want to see super in depth, super specific, or is it more just basic milestones? What do you typically see?
Yeah, so again, I think it works best when it's not only kind of at the, I'm going to say at the epic level, right? So you aren't talking about how you are going to implement a specific feature, but you're going to talk about what goals you're going to be able to accomplish for users, and then what business value that accomplishes. So it's really easy when talking about product to get too granular in what you're talking about. But if you keep that kind of picking it up to the business goals that these things are achieving, and then what the user is going to be able to do, then from there you can, sort of very roughly, if you want to, say kind of the percentage involvement from different teams, but I normally don't go that granular. But just keeping it to the goals from the business, the major pieces that the user will be able to do in order to accomplish those goals, and keeping it there for the most part. Often, if there's big engineering pieces that need to be done that are not easily mapped to a user goal, then you can talk that through separately. But normally, you can keep it all mapped to business goals.
Great, and I think we've got time for one more question that I think both of you could provide some insight on here. Pretty great high-level question. What's the best way to search for an outsourced solution? So if it's either on the product side, EB, like you've discussed a little bit, or Alaa, I know we get that question a lot from our side with other service providers like we do. Alaa, we'll start with you. I mean, what do we normally recommend from the early growth side as far as people looking for outsourced providers for, like, when it's time to hire somebody for HR, right? Or if they it's time to get a new law firm or something along those lines. How do we typically approach that?
My approach is really you can't afford at this stage to gamble on folks that don't have proven results. Therefore, reference and reputation is really, really important. Having an advisor that could help you in these decisions, that has a good visibility into the ecosystem. So if it's a lawyer or a banker, an insurance provider, an HR consultant, and so on, having somebody that you trust that could give you references and leads into those providers, I think it's the best way to make a decision. Then therefore you could kind of narrow your scope of folks that you could meet with to make to help you make those decisions. A lot of times people make decisions based on somebody who's a consultant, for example, who hasn't been there, done that. At that time, it's very, very critical in the company development to go down the road with somebody that has not proven themselves, or you have not had experience with, and then later find out that that's not the best source. So making good decisions there is really important, and having a good consultant, somebody that you can trust that can help you in that process, is probably the best way to manage that decision.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, EB, you mentioned outsourcing product development teams. What should CEOs be looking for from that side of things?
Yeah, so I really agree with what Alaa has already said. Talk to people in your network, see if they have any recommendations, and then take the time to talk to whoever you're going to hire. See if they can speak to their process, how they speak to their process. Even if you don't know all of the details of what that person should be doing, that's okay. Make them do the talking, and don't worry about it. Especially from the development side and early in funding, it can be easy to go with someone cheap. And as I say, especially from development, that can be a tough path to go down, because you need to look at all of the elements of what that person is going to be doing. So it may seem cheaper at the outset, but then are you going to have to manage it more, or do they not have all of the skills they need? So again, kind of really agreeing with what Paula said there, where you want someone or a team that has proven that they already know how to do what you need them to do.
Oh, that's great. Great answers, both of you. Thank you very much. I think that's going to be it for us today. I think we've hit the new hour here. So I just want to thank everybody that attended today. Great questions. Thank you for joining us. And finally, I want to thank Alaa and EB, both of you, for joining us today and providing some fantastic insight. And one final note, we will have this recorded, so this will be up on our YouTube channel, and all attendees will be getting an email within 48 hours with this recording. So Alaa, EB, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a great day, everybody.